All right, coming at you from beautiful BC. This is Left in the Valley 2.0. My name is Kevin, and I told my girlfriend I wanted to be cremated, and she made an appointment for me Tuesday. Joining me as usual is the incredible Troy. Troy, man, how you doing?
Pretty good. Sounds like your wife burned you, though.
Ouch.
Or at least about to. No.
And today we are joined by the legendary Free Thought Prophets. Gentlemen, welcome to the show once again.
Thanks for having us. Hello. How are things, folks?
We're doing great. We're doing great. You know, this is not the first time on the show, but no, it's the first time for everybody watching because you never know. Maybe you'd be so kind to give us a quick background as to who the Free Prophets are. Free Thought Prophets, I should say. The Free Prophets kind of makes it feel it's a bargain basement thing.
I'll go, actually, because Seamus is always too modest to tell this story properly. So I think everyone is... I guess everyone has heard these stories before, where you get some loopy Christian who'll tell you that they had a near-death experience and they went to the light and they met Jesus and it was so lovely, and this is what turned them to Christianity. So Seamus is the inverse of that. Seamus used to be a conservative Christian, and without getting into the details, he had a near-death experience and had exactly the opposite interpretation of that. In other words, I had some ocular type interference and went and did a bit of research and looked it up, and actually it was quite consistent with oxygen deprivation to the brain, and looked up a few more things, and all of a sudden he wasn't a Christian anymore. And at around that time, in his particular place of work, it wasn't a good idea to share the details of the latest hitch slap on your social media page. So he had to find an anonymous pseudonym to go by, and he started off with the Free Thought Prophet sobriquet. I was one of his early guests on the podcast, so I've been clinging on to his coattails ever since.
You know, it makes perfect sense because I've always been told there's a correlation between lack of oxygen and deprivation and podcasting.
That's yes.
I think
yes.
At this point. And Seamus, you want to add to that because that seems like a pretty full thing right there.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, John obviously spot on with everything that started this. Definitely wanted to do something with coming away from. I was a part of the Church of Christ, which is kind of Westboro Light for those that don't know. You know, they kind of agree with everything, just a little bit less out the public about it. You know, so obviously I had a bit of a whiplash wanting to do something, you know, to the opposite. Started doing a podcast. Obviously, Irish roots. I know that's a big shock to everybody. So I reached out to Ireland, you know, trying to, because I figured there had to be some sort of resistance as it's the Pope's summer home, right? So come to find Atheist Ireland, and they got me in touch with John, and it was like talking to somebody that, you know, I've known all my life. It was just one of those instantaneous things. At that point, I already decided I was wanting to do something different with the podcast. I'd rather bring somebody in. He seemed the perfect guy to do it. We talked, and it's been history. So I'm super lucky that I have a guy that's articulate, urbane, and actually could.
I can't be Seamus. I'm just the icon.
Okay, all right, yeah. I didn't want to say it like that, but yeah, okay.
Well, I want to say right off the bat, it's always a pleasure having you guys on board, but I am kind of disappointed today, guys, because normally I could visibly see a bottle of whiskey somewhere.
Oh.
No, and I'm not. Oh, there we go. Thank you. I was trying to wonder if I had the right guys here.
Okay,
yeah.
Now I'm wondering if I should give to peer pressure and get some whiskey for my coffee. And so,
by all means, represent Canadian whiskey, man, because I don't drink, so I got to go with Pepsi or something.
Nice.
I'm not sure the world is ready for me drunk.
Oh boy.
I'm a happy drunk. I'm lucky.
So, there you go.
Yeah.
Guys, today we're just going to shoot the shit on a whole bunch of things. And one thing that I just want to kind of get into is you guys lately have been going after a lot of criticism about a group called Atheism International. Mm-hmm. Right? I want to get, you know, I mean, frankly, we're Canadians. Everybody loves us, and we love everybody, and we're sorry for everything.
Exactly.
When
Don't
we
you forget
take
it.
over- And when we take over the world, you'll be sorry too.
Yes.
There's a bit of a battle going on with that group, and I thought maybe you guys would give us a bit of exposition on your side of the story. What's going on?
Sure. Well, firstly, let me give you a couple of sentences on what Atheist Alliance International is. So it's the only atheist group in the world that has special consultative status at the United Nations, and it also has participatory status at the Council of Europe. So if you go off to the United Nations and you want to lobby there, they will only accept international groups. So, what's the biggest atheist group in the world? Is it American Atheists or whatever it is? If American atheists want to go off and lobby at the UN, they can't. You need a democratic international group to do that, and that's what Atheist Alliance International was founded as. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago. It was an alliance of, I think there were 36 different national atheist groups from around the world, from every continent, who would come together and agree policy, and then there would be lobbying in different contexts. So, one very quick example that was relevant in Ireland, we until some years ago, we had a blasphemy provision in our constitution. So if you guys might be familiar that, you get a politician on the talk radio show and you give them a hard time and they'll get off the program and really not care one jot. But actually, every few years, a delegation from the country has to go to the United Nations when they're interrogated in front of all of the other countries about their human rights record. So Atheist Ireland, through Atheist Alliance International, was able to attend the full session of the Human Rights Council. So that's the full body. When every delegation from every United Nations country is there, we've all seen it on the background. So yeah, Atheist Alliance International gave Ireland a hard time about their blasphemy provision. As you can imagine, the politicians don't like showing up at the United Nations and being embarrassed. So the next time they were there, a couple of years later, by that time we'd have a referendum and we had blasphemy removed from our constitution. So it's really an environment where you can lobby very effectively. You won't be surprised to hear at all of these sessions, the churches are very well represented. They put a lot of money into these things. All of the different Christian denominations, all of the different Muslim denominations, every religion you can think of from around the world wants to tell the United Nations what they think about human rights. And so I think it's important that there's an atheist voice there too.
No, I think it's a great thing, and it's certainly a great idea. I think for a lot of atheists, the first thing that happens when you become an atheist is you always feel that you're alone, and we certainly have that on the show is to say you're not alone. And I think it's very important for us to start a movement, and basically, I wouldn't use the word militant here, but start lobbying, because we all. The non-religious section of the population is actually a bigger lobby than the Jews, for example, or a bigger percentage of the population. And this is very important that we're not represented in most governments. I mean, in the United States, for example, there's still some states where you cannot run for office as an atheist, and that's incredible. So I think the idea of Atheist Alliance International, I think, is a very good idea. And for our audience, in case you didn't know, Canada also had a blasphemy law. It's only been used once. I think we've repealed this now. Troy, you remember?
I read it, but I don't remember right now.
The only time it was actually brought up was to fight the release of the movie from Monty Python, The Life of Brian.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I've watched a few old old TV talk shows with John Cleese defending the movie Life of Brian.
Yes.
And it's kind of funny because you listen to it now, and this priest that would sound completely reasonable at the time sounds like a radical creationist by today's standards.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you guys have been keeping an eye on Atheist International Alliance.
Yeah.
I'm getting the name wrong.
It's okay.
Oh, you're quite right. It's an absolute mouthful. It's Atheist Alliance International,
Yes.
and yeah,
AI.
what happened was
That's
I
it.
know
There you
you
go.
guys know Christine Chelska.
Yes.
So when I was there, so I used to be the secretary of AAI, and during that period, Christine was my president in the organization. She was hugely impressive in that role. She used to attend a lot of conferences and do a lot of speaking events on behalf of AAI. Unfortunately, after Chris left, there was a bit of a coup.
Oh.
So a bunch of people, a small group of individuals, essentially took the organization over in a very dishonest and anti-democratic manner. And the difficulty is when you're not representative of a large group of people, when you're accountable to no one but yourself, then you start to do stupid things, like invade Ukraine or something like that. So these guys, and they were all guys, unfortunately, they've done a bunch of stupid things. So, for example, if when I was there or when Chris was there, if Chris wanted to go off to talk to the United Nations, she would have to get the submission past 36 national atheist groups. And those atheist groups would have included the Freedom from Religion Foundation, Annie Laurie Gaylor, and Dan Barker. It would have included Mariam Namazi and the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain. It would include literally the most experienced atheist campaigners around the world. In other words, it wouldn't make it to the United Nations until it was coherent and cogent and it made a lot of sense. But yeah, the current lot unfortunately are accountable to no one because they've removed all democratic legitimacy from the organization. So in the last 5 years since they've done that, they've only made one submission to the United Nations, and that was to demand the right to be secular. Now, when I say that out loud, you guys are probably thinking, well, hang on, there's already a right to be secular, and you
Hmm.
would be exactly right. So, there is literally decades of case law that says the human right to the freedom of belief includes both theistic and atheistic beliefs. And the current crowd just didn't understand this, and they read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They realized the word secular doesn't appear in there. And so they wrote to the Secretary General of the United Nations and started a campaign demanding the right to be secular. Now, what the Secretary General of the United Nations thought of it when he received correspondence from the world's only atheist group at the United Nations demanding a right that had existed for 50 years, we don't
Yeah.
know because they just ignored it. I think it would be great if we could return to the time when Christine Shelka was running the organization on a democratic basis.
Well, I don't know. I mean, she's on this podcast now. I don't know. This is big potatoes here compared to your UN. I mean,
I'm trying to steal Chris away from your podcast. Maybe I should have signed a non-solicitation agreement before I come on here.
No, Christine is fantastic. She's got lots of great things to bring to the show. And if she goes back to the UN, all the power to her. I'll be behind her 100%. So you said, for example, they decided to they kind of did a bit of a coup and an anti-democratic.
Yep.
What does that exactly mean?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what they did was, firstly, they in the year 2017 they made just a massive mess of the organization. They were unable, for some reason, to send out any invoices for membership subscriptions. They did not arrange an AGM. So every year there's supposed to be an AGM when the board gets elected and gets a mandate for the next year. They didn't do that. So on 1st of January 2018, there essentially was no board. And a lot of the senior affiliate member groups came together to try and reorganize the organization. And essentially what these guys did was they arranged a secret meeting when they called it an AGM, but they didn't tell anyone about it. And they changed the bylaws. And the changes to the bylaws they made was to say The board is no longer elected by the members. They decided they would elect the members, them personally.
What?
Yeah, they decided they would appoint directors from now on. They took out the provision that required an AGM. They took out the need for them to report annual financial accounts to the members. And by the way, because they no longer produced accounts, their status as a non-profit was revoked.
Oh
So
man.
they're now no longer a non-profit organization. And the way they did this was to manipulate the electorate. So let me give you their version, okay?
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
I think their version is very generous to themselves, but this is what they've admitted. What they've admitted is that they excluded the majority of the members from this meeting, and they invited to vote members that didn't have a vote and weren't entitled to vote, essentially their mates. What they did was they phoned, for example, a guy called Fotis in Greece. They phoned him a week before the meeting. They invited him to join as a member for $1. He joined, he voted with them, and then the week afterwards, he was appointed to the board. So he was at that time a member of the Atheist Union for Greece. He has since been expelled by the Atheist Union for Greece, but he is currently the treasurer of Atheist Alliance International. So what they did was they had this meeting while excluding the majority of member groups. They invited to the meeting people who weren't entitled to vote, but they control the bank account. They control all the systems. They just said, okay, we've changed the bylaws and now we control the organization, and that was that. And when this was brought up and highlighted, they essentially admitted it. So you can go and read in their website when they said, yes, that's right. We did exclude all of these groups from the meeting, and for that we apologize. And of course, we said, well, hang on, it's not just good enough to apologize. I mean, if you had this meeting which was not arranged according to the bylaws, then anything that you did at that meeting is null and void, and we have to reverse back to the situation that applied beforehand.
I believe
But-
that's usually the
And then
way
they said,
forward.
let's ask the people in charge and what do they think? And the people in charge like, thumbs up.
Yeah.
Exactly that, Troy. In fact,
Mea culpa.
they one of the guys involved was called Bill Flavelle, and one of the first things that he did after he joined the board was award a contract to his children to do I think it was web development work,
Yeah.
wasn't it, Seamus?
Yep.
So he awarded a contract, a no tender, uncompetitive contract from AAI funds to his own children, and of course people complained about this, and there was an investigation which followed exactly what you just described, Troy. The investigation took the following form. Bill Flavelle investigated the conduct of Bill Flavelle and decided that Bill Flavelle did nothing wrong when Bill Flavelle gave money to Bill Flavelle's children.
And he's an awesome guy too. So
Well, yeah.
he's getting a medal next year.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get a tremendous singing voice as well.
From Bill Lavelle. Yeah, I think one of the dangerous things about not having elected representatives in an organization like that is there's so many different kinds of atheists out there.
Sure.
And some can be very polarized on like where do they fall on the Dawkins scale, or how do they associate their atheism?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do they think other people should think about atheism? And it's and if you don't have a democracy of voting, then that group is going to go in directions that no one can identify with.
Exactly.
I think you're absolutely right, Troy. I mean, it's the old argument of whether you should be a firebrand atheist or more diplomatic atheist,
Mhm.
and again, your approach. And if you're working in an international body that is supposed to speak at the UN, and like you said, first of all, that goes to the UN and makes the gaffe of asking for a right they already have, your credibility just went down the toilet there.
Exactly that.
It's
Yeah.
also funny what you just said, Troy, and John, you tell me if I'm wrong, was kind of something that they kind of hinted at, wasn't it? That, we have to keep it as such because otherwise a bunch of feminists are going to take over this organization. Remember that?
So you're going to think we're making this up, but honestly, this is true. They introduced so their status at the United Nations was under threat because they changed the bylaws and make them anti-democratic. So they changed some of the bylaws back to give a veneer of accountability. But there was one line they inserted that said, um, the members can pass a vote on a motion at the AGM, but the board will consider if and how to implement that. So essentially, you can have 50 atheist groups from all around the world who unanimously vote on a motion for one particular position. And then you can have 3 or 4 people on the board who decide to do the exact opposite thing. And of course, they were challenged about this, and their response was, well, we have to do that to protect the organization from getting taken over by feminists. Well, I mean, firstly, like, if the members vote for a position that is a feminist one, for example, in opposition to religiously inspired misogyny, then that's exactly the position that the
Right.
organization should adopt. Like,
Yeah.
why is it the role of the board to frustrate that?
Well, what I think is ironic is I'm seeing parallels between this and certain countries we might be aware of, where say if the politicians need to distract from something, well, let's find a group to gaslight and make people fear, and it's not a sign of critical thinking, and atheists are supposed to be critical thinkers. It's at least we claim we are.
That's far from the case in most of the times. Come on.
And
Yeah.
what's kind of scary about all this too is you're giving essentially, and I'm going to use the word war here because in a way atheists are at war against a religious world.
Sure.
You're giving the enemy, for lack of a better term here, exactly what they want. You know, the aspect of all atheists are all socialist and they're all like Stalin and they just want to, they don't like democracy. You just gave him that. You just gave them ammo to say something like that. If your own organization on an international level is not democratic, you basically just walked into that trap yourself willingly. That's kind of disturbing what you guys are telling me.
Over the many years I've been in church organizations, charitable organizations, and of other sorts, and unfortunately, stuff like this happens all the time. It's a group. It's less to do with atheism or a religion or belief, and it's just one of those darker sides of human nature. Unfortunately,
the churches can use that because they can always relay the argument that we don't need to be democratic because God's in charge. Right? The entire religion is based on a dictatorship, essentially, right? A divine dictatorship. So they can always use that argument. But if we're saying that no, humans should be in charge, and no, we should be democratic, we should show that in every aspect and every organization we have.
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead.
I was going to say something which actually you did say, Troy, made me think of something else. That the response that they have to this criticism is you want atheists to die. Those that are overseas that are victims, you're causing the death and suffering of them because we have to stop the good work we're doing by answering these criticisms. You want atheists to die. That's what you want. They talk to they address this just like a church would, right? I mean, it's insane, and also that they put on this facade that there's the Boeings flying out of the sky, or there's Scotty getting ready to beam the atheists out of danger just because Bill Flavelle was waving the magic wand to do so. That doesn't fucking happen. Do you
guys feel that Bill Flavelle and the current board of Atheist Alliance International is more right-wing conservative politically?
There's a good question. I think a relevant point to that, Kevin, is what happened with the Latin American atheist groups. So earlier this year, I think there's Latin American atheist groups from 7 different countries. I think 9 groups in 7 different countries who were members of AAI. And earlier this year, all of them resigned from the organization en masse and issued a joint statement. And the joint statement indicated that they were regularly denied their votes. And this was something that other groups complained about, some groups in Africa. One group in Greece, in particular, was denied a vote and issued formal statements about this. And when you look across the world, I think there's about 60 groups at the minute. I think I'm right in saying, if you went to the Atheist Alliance International website now and looked at all of the groups there, there's 60 something. The majority of them were from Latin America, Africa, and parts of Asia. But if you look at who's on the board, it's almost all people from Europe and North America.
No.
And I think all of the officers are from either Europe or USA, so or Canada. So it, it seems to be groups from a particular part of the world who are denied their vote disproportionately, and people from other parts of the world who have the officer roles on the board.
I'll almost venture to say, I would take a bet that most of these board members are also probably all Caucasians too, right?
Yes, I think I'm thinking off the top of my head now. There's Jamila Bay is on the well. That's kind of an open question, Kevin. There's a bunch of people who are on their website as being members of the board, but literally since the day they were appointed, like some months ago, I think it was May, the last supposed election was. None of them have said a single word about it or answered a single question. So I honestly, it's hard to tell whether they're actually on the board or whether someone has put their name and their photo up there and is having a laugh, because it's really difficult to tell the difference.
So I know this is speculation here, asking you this question, but now that they've kind of controlled the board of Atheist Alliance International, and they really haven't done much of any lobbying they're supposed to do at the UN. What do you feel is their end goal? Why are they doing this?
So this is kind of speculation on the basis that it's difficult to read someone's mind, but my impression is that they like the big title on their CV. So there's one guy in particular who has contacted me several times about this issue, asking me to stop criticizing them on the podcast. And he basically openly said he's writing a book about the Catholic Church and the corruption of the Catholic Church. And his interest is that when he goes around looking for a publisher, it'll be a lot easier for him if he has a big title on a big international group. And look, that's fine if he's putting the work in and stuff like that. But, I thought it was ironic, I have to say, Kevin, that this guy was contacting me to say, you have to protect the reputation of this organization and stop criticizing it. The same guy who was writing a book about the corruption of the Catholic Church sounded exactly like a Catholic bishop to me. Let's not criticize the organization. We need to protect the
Think of what the good the church does. Think of what it does.
Yeah. Although this proves the point that for the longest time that when Christians, especially Christians, will criticize atheists, saying, "Oh, atheism is a worldview." No, it's not a worldview, because if atheism was a worldview, we wouldn't be doing the exact same things. Well, these atheists anyway wouldn't be doing the exact same things other international groups do. Right? They'd be doing something more humanistic if atheism were. So you can be an athist and be an asshole. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm living proof of that, I think. So,
I was about to put myself in there, but thanks for taking the plunge. Oh man! So in your humble opinion, I mean, what needs to be done about this? I mean, do we need to create another group that can go internationally to the UN? Do we need to take the group back over, or can we? What needs to happen here?
Good question. Do you want to take a crack at that one, Seamus?
Well, there needs to be reconciliation, right? I mean, there has to be just instead of a oopsie daisy, there has to actually be resignation by the board that's actually on now, the illegitimate board. I mean, what actuality we had our own election. We are actually the board in exile, by the way. So because we are as legitimate as they are. That's the point we try to make.
So
But anyway,
you're like the atheist version of the Dalai Lama. Yeah.
exactly. Until they get recognized. So yeah, we're in hiding. Yeah, that's it. So, yeah. But the board needs they need to admit what they did, step down, and then actually give it back to the members. Let the members decide and put forth. Whoever wants to be on the board, they can say, "Hey, I want to be elected," and then they actually get elected. Ooh.
Yeah, but how realistic is that? If these guys are doing this to put, as you say, to maybe improve their resume, how realistic is that they're going to step down?
At this point, not. That's the problem.
Well, if he's doing it to get a publishing deal, then once he's got his book published, then you guys are back in the zone.
That's right. Yeah. Come on, Pitchstone, just give it to him. Come on, guys.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a scary thought to think. I mean, first of all, I'm positive. I didn't even know that we had a group that was lobbying at the UN. Just shows my ignorance. And
no, because they haven't done anything for so many years, Kevin. Why would you know? I mean, that's everything.
Yeah, but you would think I would know.
Yeah. Wow.
So I'm pleasantly surprised to see that we have a possible voice at the UN. I'm disappointed now that we have a possible voice that's not speaking at the UN, and it's sorely needed. And now we seem to be in a bit of an impasse with what to do with that group. So I guess my next question is, how easy would it be to create another group that could actually lobby at the UN?
So when I was there, actually, one of my jobs was to get participatory status at the Council of Europe. And the hoops you have to jump through are pretty similar to those at the United Nations. And it's really quite onerous. So you have to show that the organization is international, and you have to show that it's democratic. So essentially what they want to avoid is that some guy turns up in New York and stands up on the platform with all the green marble behind them, and this person is just talking shite on their own behalf. What they want to make sure is that when someone stands up from, whether it's an atheist group or some other lobbying group, that they are genuinely representative of the people that they purport to represent, and the view that they're expressing is the settled consensus of those people that they represent. So yeah, you have to jump through a lot of hoops in terms of transparency to indicate where the cash comes from. You have to publish your annual accounts. You have to be registered. In the case of AAI, they were registered as a non-profit in California, and there's a bunch of kind of reporting standards that comes with that. So you have to adhere to all of those things. And then you have to show how the organization is democratic. So yeah, there's reasonably onerous process. Now, it wouldn't be impossible, Kevin, to start from scratch. But if you can imagine that this task fell on your lap, you might think, yeah, I know, a dozen people from around the world in different countries and different atheist groups, but getting them all together to have monthly meetings, to adopt a constitution, to adopt all of these democratic standards, to adhere to the rules of a non-profit in wherever country or state you're going to be registered in. It's quite an onerous thing to do.
So what about something like unionizing the members, like getting enough members together to lobby the guys in charge, whatever, and say, hey, we don't like what's going on. It's a let's fix it, or everybody's quitting, or like we're all out of here, or 75% of us are out of there. Or
so there's two problems with that. One is that people have tried to do that, and as I mentioned, the Latin American groups provided ultimatum, and they were told literally. I mean, as Seamus says, there's a very impressive lady called Shirley Rivera who was on the board, who was a representative for all 9 of the Latin American groups. And when she resigned, she published some of the internal messages. So one of them, for example, was And just imagine this is the board of directors of an international organization that has status at the United Nations. A problem comes up with their non-profit status. The non-profit status has since been revoked, but it was first suspended. When it's suspended, the board, and in particular Shirley, is asking a few blunt questions to the treasurer and the president, WTF type questions.
Yeah, of course.
And
Yeah.
she published the internal messages that she got back from the then president, a guy called Howard Berman, who responded to say, "This is not your fucking job," in exactly those terms. And she tried to explain, actually, not alone is it my job, but it's my responsibility. That here's the responsibilities of a director of a non-profit under Californian law. I'm actually not allowed to leave this up to you, Howard. I'm supposed to know what you're doing, and if I'm not finding out what you're doing, then I'm not doing my job.
Oh, God.
But yeah, there's a small cabal on the board who sorts all these things out. Um, Anyone who objects isn't long for their position. Shirley did the honourable thing. She did her best to enforce some kind of ethical standards on the board, but when that wasn't possible, she left. And then, if I'm honest, the other difficulty, Troy, is that everyone has their own shit to deal with in their own country. So, if you're the atheist group in Pakistan or Afghanistan and Iran, all of these countries have atheist groups in AAI. Whatever drama is going on the board among a bunch of people in California is pretty low down your priority list on the shit that you have to deal with.
Yeah, fair enough.
So, yeah, part of it is that there's the small cabal who will control everything and tell others to fuck off. And then there's just the perennial problem of organizing atheists is like trying to herd cats.
Yeah, I'm assuming if you're dodging machetes because you're an atheist in Bangladesh, last thing on your mind is to be wondering what's going on in California on the board somewhere.
Yes. Can I give you one of my other? I was going to say my favorite AI stories, but one of the disastrous ones. So they purported to run this organization for what they called Atheists in Danger. Now, if you think this organization consists of literally half a dozen people in Europe and North America with laptops, you would think, as Seamus said earlier, like, this is not international rescue. If you tell someone in Afghanistan you're running a network for atheists in danger, and they send you an email, Thunderbird 1 is not going to arrive outside their house and pick them up. But they were trying to run this literally as half a dozen people with laptops, and they were contacted by someone in India who purported to want to save atheists in danger from some radical Muslim groups near the India-Pakistan border. And that was okay. His name was Manoj John, and he did that role for a while until someone else in India realized what was going on and told AAI, actually, that dude is affiliated with one of the Islamist groups, and what he's doing is hunting apostates. So what AAI was doing was essentially advertising to atheists in danger. If you have any troubles, contact us. And then sending them to this guy, Manoj John. It's just appalling.
Yeah, it's funny in an ironic way, but like you don't dare laugh because it's
Exactly.
Lives are at risk here.
Yes,
Yeah, it's exactly that, Troy. It's all fun and games when it's you and your mates in California arguing over who gets which board seat. But like, this is serious shit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the things we have a tendency to forget. Well, we're in Canada. You guys are in one of you is in the UK, the other one in the US, and it's relatively safe, to be an atheist in these countries. But there's some places around the world where, the word gets out and you're dead. You're dead meat. You're done.
Yeah, I commented earlier how like there's so many different kinds of atheists out there, but I think if there's one thing that we all have in common is we just don't want to live in a theocracy. Mm-hmm. And when you see atheists who are actually in danger living in a theocracy. It's you don't have to look at the news for very long to see how horrific that can be. Like even Iran is that lady wasn't a atheist, whatever, but she was wearing her hijab, and the morality police didn't like that, and she was murdered, and now like the country's in revolt. But so it's like I think there's even things that I think theists and atheists can agree on, because there's just because the fact that like a lot of like religious moderates, I don't think would advocate that killing somebody because they did something that was haram is the right thing for society to do. But that's just my little rant.
No, if you're a religious moderate, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
But, unfortunately, it seems that a lot of these theocracies are not run by the religious moderate.
Well, the religious moderates are really nice people, and they're really quiet.
Yeah.
And they don't realize that in the course of being quiet, they provide a foundation for the more militant religious people out there, who will go out and like bomb an abortion clinic or try to strip somebody of their rights or so on. But either way, I'm ranting again.
No, you're exactly right. And the same thing's true in this part of the world. So I think this was the case in Canada as well, maybe until recent.
Yeah,
decades.
we lost that battle.
Well, we've got a large portion of our education system is controlled by the Catholic Church, and when you complain about this, a response that you'll very often hear is very consistent with what Troy just explained. That I know so many Catholics, and they're all universally and uniformly wonderful people, and most Catholics are moderates and don't believe all the doctrinaire stuff. And the answer I always give is, yeah, but the bishop doesn't appoint most Catholics to run the school. The bishop appoints the most doctrinaire Catholic who's going to adhere to catechism. So that, as you say, Troy, the fact that there's lots of moderates out there sometimes doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree. I mean, in Canada here, each province has a different way of funding the religious schools. And when I've talked to a few politicians here in BC, it's 50%. The public purse will fund religious school up to 50%. In Alberta next door, it's 100%.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it varies from province to province. But the thing is, when I talked to a few politicians about this, saying, you guys are always looking to find some funds for the public schools, and you're always lamenting that you don't have the money. How about you just cut off the religious schools and use that money and feed the public schools, essentially, that they sorely needed? And their first response was, well, everybody deserves an education. Yes, I know. I'm not disagreeing with that. with that. I'm saying, that kid doesn't need to go to a Muslim school or whatever, because I actually have a friend who teaches at a Muslim school, and she will tell you that they're much more concerned about following what's in the Quran than following the curriculum. They will follow the curriculum because they have inspectors that come in on a regular basis to make sure they do.
Yeah.
But the principal concern is not to follow the curriculum to build these kids up to be productive members of society down the road. They're much more concerned about building new
indoctrinating.
Do you mind if I ask you guys a question about that? Because very often when we have the debate here in Ireland about the religious schools, the kind of excuse is offered that, look, it's so pervasive and it will be such a big change to take the religions out, and the Catholic Church owns the land that so much schools are built on, blah, 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 blah. And sometimes the kind of counter to that is the Canadian case. So it's often said that Canada used to have an education system that was dominated by the religious, but that has been slowly backed out. Does that sound familiar to you guys, or is that a misrepresentation?
I think it's a yes and no type thing, because like you'll have like the British Columbia Law Society, they won't recognize lawyers trained at certain religious schools just because of the fact that these are the same schools that perpetuate human right violations against the LGBTQ community. Yeah. So, but at the same time, though, they still get like other schools will get funding. So certain parts of our society, there are consequences for these schools for not that are indoctrinating more than educating.
Yeah.
But it's the schools themselves, like the lower level ones at least, still get quite a bit of education. Kevin, you might know better than me, or
I wouldn't say I know better, but there's also a historical context you got to bear in mind here. When Canada was developing as a nation, and it was basically going from east to west, as the provinces were developing, there was also always this competition between the Catholics and the Protestants.
Yeah,
right? So if Canada that would favor Catholics, then the Protestants would label that politician and say, "Hey, all these schools are being taught by Catholics. That we should have an equal amount of schools." And then the politician would say, "Okay, fine. To shut you up, you get the fund. We'll give you half the funding so you can have your schools as well." And that kind of swept across the entire country like this. What's interesting about what's happening in Canada now is we're finding out that there's kind of a small rebellion that's happening against religious organization, especially in light of what the historical harm they've done to First Nations. We've seen with these the Kamloops school massacre and all that stuff, and I think a lot of these people right now are taking a serious look at the harm, the historical harm the religion have done to a lot of these groups, and they're essentially losing their credibility.
Yeah.
But the average Joe is not as informed as we are, even though we're not super informed about the funding in the politics of how schools are funded in the political sphere.
Yeah. Well, with residential schools, traditionally they didn't really get that much funding. You look at the reports done on it, and the government gave bare skin and bones for the funding. Schools that weren't as abusive and as in horrid conditions, a lot of the time they had donations from the community where people would donate leftover food or spoilage or whatever to the kids. And then you'll see other reports where children are hunting down cats because they don't have enough food to eat. And or sleeping in backlogged sewage where they get gonorrhea because someone had a scratch and having to walk through sewage to get from out of the dorm. It was just horrible conditions that a lot of people don't know about. But at the same time, though, it's like you throw the veneer of a church on the outside of these institutions, and you don't question it. Because I remember when I was younger, you don't question the priests. Yes. I remember in 81, 82, we'd have Catholic priest jokes going around the playground of child molestation and stuff. But the first arrest wasn't made till 9-10 years later. Right. the kids were talking about it before the adults were, because the adults were indoctrinated to not question the church.
That always shocks me. I mean, I remember talking to I was dating this girl a couple of years ago, and she's Italian and a nice Italian family, and these scandals were coming out, and the old folks would say, "Oh, we've known this about priest diddling little boys forever," and I'm looking at it and say, "Well, why didn't anybody say anything about this?" I said, this didn't happen to my kids. I mean, it's like, wow. I was like, what the hell? This is what's wrong with society.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a degree of apathy also, back then. It is what it is, as long as it doesn't happen to me.
Not just back then, even now. I think it's one of the biggest problems. And I think probably the biggest lesson about this Atheist Alliance International is exactly that. The apathy maybe shown by the members have allowed this takeover, and now we have twice as much work to do to get that organization back.
Yeah, it's something I've noticed is after religion, it's you have that and I don't know what your experience is, but first you realize that, oh crap, okay, it's all made up, and then a couple of years after that, is you start to realize that all this baggage that you were taught while you were religious, you kind of bring that with you. So it's you can have atheists, whatever, who are they don't believe in God anymore, but they still have that crappy behavior that they were taught to judge that you're right and everybody else is wrong. That just toxic behavior that never get to in the de-indoctrination process. But at least that's just my personal opinion. It's and like I said though, like because of that you have all this, like the problems that you're having with the AAI. That's not an atheist problem. That's like a human problem. That's
Agreed.
something that you see everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Totally agree.
Okay, well, one last question for you guys. Before we're running against the clock. I know you guys are busy as hell. When you look at the future and you look at AI, the future, you think are we positive about getting these guys back, or are you guys thinking, no, we should just cut our losses, do something else?
Wait
What
till
do you
after the
think,
book
Seamus?
deal.
What What does your gut tell you, Seamus?
I think it's screwed. It's got to be fixed from within, and it just doesn't appear that there's nobody there really to want to do it. I mean, you have to get rid of the you have to cut the poison from the tree, so to speak. And I don't see anybody able to do that or willing to do it at this point. So,
But if there was somebody like we talked about Christine earlier, let Christine
yeah.
to do a comeback, and you seem to be enough discontent members.
Yeah.
You think you're a big enough push to basically make things happen.
Yeah, I think someone like Christine would be great. Christine's nobody's fool, so I don't think she would be conned into anything. The reason I say that is there's a guy called David Ornstein, and we interviewed him on the podcast when he joined the AAI Advisory Council, and he was talking about going for the board. And we had an extremely friendly interview with him when we advised him to say, look, this is an absolute shit show. And I think what I said at the time, Seamus, was that aphorism, you lie down with dogs and you get fleas, and said, look, just be careful. So David later that year became president. He was president for, I think, 2 weeks, and then he resigned. And then Nina Sankari took over. She was president for less than a week, and then she resigned. I think, from Christine's perspective, as I say, she's nobody's fool. She doesn't need advice from me. She knows if she wants to get involved, she knows exactly what she's getting involved with. As long as she goes into it with her eyes open, as I'm sure she will, no better person to sort it out. The only thing I would say is I have to agree with Seamus that the brand is just so damaged now. At the very least, they would need a new name. They would need to rebrand and call themselves something else and have some kind of mechanism to draw really a clear, bright line between the past and the future. So that, I mean, I'm sure Chris doesn't want to be the next person in the row after David Orenstein and Nina Sankari and Brian Kernick. And I mean, they had... they literally had 4 different presidents in the space of a month earlier this year. Wow. So, I don't think becoming the 5th in that line is so attractive. But if someone, as I say, can draw a clear, bright line between the past and the future, rebrand the thing, maybe there's something that they can do, and no better person than Chris.
Well, John, I guess the real question is, how long do you have to regain to hold the title so you can put it on your CV to sell a book?
I'm going to announce my candidacy for president of the Atheist Alliance.
Right.
I'm so clueless. What the hell could you possibly do to me? I'm just the guy that's going to go, good work, Captain, and keep on walking.
Okay. So I got a question. Like, assuming in a magical world or whatever that the AAI is suddenly firing on all cylinders and working properly, what do you think is the most important thing that I should be doing right now?
Good question.
Good question indeed. Well, the last thing that they were doing that I was involved with was some years ago was assisting groups from... so the United Nations has a venue in New York that everyone knows, and there's one in Geneva as well. So if you're an atheist group in, let's say, Pakistan or Afghanistan, it's pretty tough to get to New York and stand up in front of the green marble thing. So there was an effort to lobby the delegations from those countries on behalf of the groups that were there. So the United Nations has a process called the UPR, the Universal Periodic Review. And it's basically every so often a delegation from one of these countries has to stand up and defend their human rights record in front of every other country in the organization. And, whereas it was relatively easy for the Atheist Ireland group to jump on a 90-minute flight to Geneva and give their delegation a hard time. It's not just as easy for the group in Pakistan, say, to do that. So I think we did something around interrogating the group from Pakistan. But if we could extend that so that every time someone turned up from, let's say, one of these Islamist organizations, or actually the Vatican has representation at the United Nations and the Council of Europe. Every time the Vatican turned up, if there was, I think you mentioned firebrand atheists earlier, Kevin.
Mhm.
If there was a firebrand atheist to put a few uncomfortable facts to the Vatican representative, then that would be better than the silence we have at the minute.
I think I would agree, and I think it's a great way to put it, guys. John, Seamus, thank you so much for being on the show today. Really appreciate that. If people want to find out more about what you guys are doing and what you're up to, where can they find you?
At the FT Prophet on Twitter, and John, will you change your handle on Twitter so you have to tell him because I can't remember it.
My tale of woe.
Yeah.
I used to follow Cousin Mark. Well, I still do on Twitter. He came to film that half of the last movie in Ireland. Strangely, he didn't call around to my house, guys. It was bizarre. But the only other famous Hamill in the world used to have a Twitter handle, which was Hamill himself. I changed mine to J Hamill himself. And literally the very next day, Mark Hamill changed his to just Mark Hamill. So for one glorious day, I was one character away from Mark Hamill's Twitter handle. But since then, yeah, I've been J Hamill himself, and nobody really knows why.
Sounds great. Perfect. Guys, I also want to take a quick minute to announce that the Left of the Valley podcast will probably be doing a fundraiser for religion, recovering from religion. It should be happening November 12th. We'll be doing a virtual bingo game in the background as we do our show, as we're doing interviews like this. So keep in touch, and we'll let you guys know what's happening there. And it's all a big fundraiser for recovering from religion. Thank you guys so much for being on the show. And before I let you go, as per usual, I got to have you say, hi, this is Seamus, and this is John from the Free Thought Prophet, and we took it left of the valley.
1, 2, 3, go. No.
Seamus.
This is John.
We took a left at the valley.
Fantastic. Sounds great. Thank